The pot flew across the kitchen. I barely had time to react before it slammed against the floor. Rice exploded everywhere. The white grain scattered across the marble tiles like shattered pieces of my dignity. I froze. My hands are gripping a serving tray. My body ached from exhaustion. My mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. Across from me stood my husband, Han Do-yoon, one of Korea's most successful businessmen. The man the world admired. The man I had loved with everything I had. And at that moment, the man screamed at me. "What is wrong with you?" His voice thundered through the kitchen. "The guests have been waiting for 10 minutes." I stared at him, stunned. 10 minutes. That was what this was about. Not the fact that I'd been awake since 4 in the morning. Not the fact that I'd cooked enough food for 50 guests by myself. Not the fact that I'd cleaned the mansion from top to bottom. Not the fact that I'd spent the entire day running between the kitchen and the dining hall without sitting down once. No. The rice had arrived 10 minutes late, and apparently that made me a failure. "You had one job, Fatima." "One job?" I almost laughed. The sound died in my throat. One job? I was the cook, cleaner, event planner, hostess, maid, and the personal assistant. I was the woman who made sure every detail of his life ran smoothly. But somehow, none of that mattered. Outside the kitchen, I could hear laughter. The guests were enjoying the party. The party I had spent 3 days preparing for alone because every employee in this house had been fired months ago. "Saving money," he said. "Building discipline," he said. Meanwhile, I became the staff. My legs felt weak. My head pounded. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten. The smell of food suddenly made me nauseous. Do-yoon stepped closer, still angry, complaining, and talking. But the words started to blur together. My ears rang. My vision swam. And for a terrifying moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the kitchen floor. A tear slipped down my cheek, then another. Not because of the rice, not because of the shouting, but because I suddenly realized something. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being his wife and become his servant. The worst part? This wasn't even the lowest point of my marriage. Not even close. That's me, Fatima. And I know you're probably wondering how I ended up in a situation where my billionaire husband was throwing food across the kitchen and screaming at me in front of a house full of guests. But before I tell you that story, make sure you like this video, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and tell me where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 3 years ago, my life looked completely different. Back then, I was just another woman trying to survive in Seoul. I had a decent job, my own apartment, my own dreams, and absolutely no idea that one accidental coffee spill would change the course of my life. It happened on a Monday morning. I was running late for work. My phone kept vibrating with messages from my manager. I had an iced Americano in one hand and my laptop bag in the other. I was rushing through a crowded sidewalk when it happened. My foot caught the edge of a loose paving stone. I stumbled forward and crashed into someone. The iced Americano flew out of my hand. Cold coffee splashed across a man's expensive suit. My heart stopped. "Oh my God!" I immediately grabbed napkins from my bag. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The man looked down at his soaked shirt. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. A deep, warm laugh. "It's fine." I blinked. Fine? Most people would have been furious, especially considering the suit looked expensive enough to pay my monthly rent. Then he bowed slightly. "Actually, I should apologize too." I stared at him. "What?" I wasn't paying attention. His smile widened. "We both caused the accident." For a moment, I just stood there speechless. He was handsome. He had the kind of face people turned around to look at twice. But what stood out most wasn't his appearance. It was how kind he seemed. I bowed quickly and apologized again. Then I rushed off to work before I got fired. I honestly thought I'd never see him again. I was wrong. The next morning, he was standing outside the same coffee shop, holding 2 iced Americanos. When he saw me, he smiled. "Good morning." I laughed. "What are the chances?" "Pretty high." He handed me one of the drinks. "I've been waiting 20 minutes." That should have been my warning sign. Instead, I accepted the coffee, and that was how it started. At first, it was just small conversations, 5 minutes before work, 10 minutes if we both arrived early. We talked about food, work, travel, movies, and life. Nothing serious, nothing complicated. Then somehow those conversations became part of my routine, and before long, part of my day. The morning talks turned into text messages. The text messages turned into phone calls. The phone calls turned into dinners, weekend walks, late-night conversations, and dates. Lots of dates. The more time I spent with Han Do-yoon, the more I fell for him. He remembered everything. My favorite foods, my favorite flowers, the names of my childhood friends, the stories I'd told him weeks earlier. He listened. When I was sick, he brought medicine. When I was stressed, he stayed on the phone with me until I fell asleep. When I doubted myself, he became my biggest supporter. For the first time in my life, I felt completely loved. A year later, he proposed. It happened beside the Han River. It was simple, private, and perfect. He looked nervous. I looked shocked. And before he could even finish asking, I said yes. That was the happiest yes of my life. The months after our wedding felt like a dream. Every morning started with laughter. Every night ended with us together. I genuinely believed I had married the perfect man. Then, one night changed everything. I had just returned from a 3-day business trip. I was exhausted. My feet hurt. My back hurts. All I wanted was a hot meal and a shower. As I unlocked the apartment door, I smiled. The chef probably prepared dinner already. That was the arrangement. The apartment was always stocked. Meals were always ready. Neither of us had to worry about household chores. But when I walked inside, the apartment was dark, quiet, and empty. No smell of food. No chef. No staff. Nothing. I frowned. I was confused. Maybe everyone had gone home early. And Do-yoon wasn't home either. When he finally arrived later that night, he acted as if nothing was unusual. I waited for an explanation. None came. Too exhausted to argue, I showered and went to bed hungry. The next morning, I was dragged awake by his voice. "Fatima." I groaned, half asleep. "Fatima, wake up." I opened my eyes. Do-yoon was already dressed, ready for work. "What's wrong?" He looked at me expectantly. "Aren't you making breakfast?" I stared at him. Certainly, I had heard wrong. "What?" "Breakfast." He checked his watch. "We're already running late." I sat up, completely confused. Why would I make breakfast? His expression changed as if I had asked a ridiculous question. "Because you're my wife." The room suddenly felt colder. I laughed nervously, waiting for him to smile, to tell me he was joking. He didn't. Instead, he sat beside the bed. "You told me African women are hardworking." I frowned. "What does that have to do with breakfast?" "They take care of their husbands." I stared at him. "They cook and take care of the home." My confusion slowly turned into disbelief. I wasn't hearing the man I married. I was hearing a stranger. Do-yoon. He stood completely serious. "The chef is gone." I blinked. "What?" "The other domestic staff, too." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean gone?" I let them go. The words hit me like a truck. "You fired them?" He nodded casually as if discussing the weather. "I don't think we need them anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had returned from a business trip less than 12 hours ago, and somehow my entire life had changed overnight. Seeing no room for argument, I eventually dragged myself into the kitchen, still shocked, confused, and trying to understand what was happening. An hour later, breakfast sat on the table. Do-yoon took a bite and smiled, and then delivered the sentence that shattered everything. "You should resign from your job." The glass of water slipped from my fingers. It crashed onto the floor, shattering into dozens of pieces. But even that sound wasn't as loud as the one inside my chest. The shattered glass lay between us. Water spread slowly across the floor. Neither of us moved. I was the first to speak. "What?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Do-yoon calmly set down his fork. "You heard me." I laughed. A short, nervous laugh. The kind people make when they're sure they've misunderstood something. "No," I shook my head. "I definitely didn't." He leaned back in his chair. "I don't want you working anymore." The words hit harder the second time. I stared at him, waiting for him to explain, to say it was temporary, to say he wanted me to rest, to say anything that made sense. Instead, he smiled as if he was giving me good news. "I make more than enough money for both of us." I felt my stomach tighten. "That's not the point." "Then what's the point?" I opened my mouth, then closed it, because where was I even supposed to begin? My job wasn't just a paycheck. It was my career, my independence, my friends, my routine, and my identity. The life I had built before he came along. And now he was asking me to throw it away. "No." The answer slipped out before I could stop it. His expression immediately hardened. The smile disappeared. The warmth I'd fallen in love with vanished. "No," I swallowed. "No." For the first time since our wedding, tension filled the room, the kind that made it difficult to breathe. I worked hard for my career. I tried to keep my voice calm. I love my job. "You don't need it." "I do." "You don't." "Do-yoon." "Fatima." His voice sharpened. The interruption caught me off guard, because he had never spoken to me like that before. He folded his hands together. "Who would take care of the house?" I blinked. "What?" "The cleaning, cooking, laundry, and grocery shopping." I stared at him, unsure where this was going. He continued. "Who's going to do all of that?" The answer felt obvious. "The staff?" His jaw tightened. The staff I just let go. A knot formed in my chest. This wasn't a discussion. I suddenly realized it had never been one. He had already fired the staff, already made the decision, already rearranged our lives without asking me, without warning me, without even considering what I wanted. "You should have talked to me first." The words slipped out. His expression darkened. "Why?" I almost thought I'd heard him wrong. "What do you mean, why?" I paused. "Do-yoon, we're married." I stared at him. His eyes narrowed slightly. "No, Fatima." He leaned forward. For the first time since I'd met him, I felt uncomfortable around my husband. A strange feeling settled over me, like the ground beneath my feet was shifting, like I was seeing someone I didn't recognize. "You'll be happier at home." His voice softened again, as if that somehow made everything better. "You've been working too hard. I like working. You won't need to anymore." I looked at the broken glass on the floor, at the water spreading across the tiles, at the breakfast I never wanted to make, and suddenly I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't tired anymore. I was scared because this wasn't really about my job, and it wasn't really about breakfast. It was about control. I just didn't know it yet. Back then, I still thought this was a misunderstanding, a rough patch, a strange conversation we'd laugh about later. I had no idea that this breakfast table would become the battlefield where my marriage slowly started to die. And the worst part? I still loved him enough to believe him when he said he was doing it for my own good. So when he asked me again a week later, I didn't say no. I know you're wondering why I didn't object. I loved my husband, and I wanted our marriage to work. After I resigned, I told myself it was temporary. Just a few months, maybe a year, I'd help settle into married life, then return to work. At least, that's what I believed. The reality was very different. My days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. The mansion had 15 bedrooms, 2 big living rooms, a mini ballroom, a home office, gym, library, wine cellar, massive kitchen, and a garden large enough to belong to a luxury hotel. Every morning, I cleaned. Every afternoon, I cooked. Every evening, I cleaned again. Then I cooked some more. Then cleaned again. Somewhere in between, I watered flowers, trimmed hedges, dusted furniture, washed sheets, folded laundry, organized closets, polished silverware, and restocked supplies. The only employee Do-yoon kept was a security guard. Apparently, protecting the house was necessary, but protecting his wife from exhaustion wasn't. The first few months, I tried to make the best of it. I told myself I was adjusting, learning, growing, and being a supportive wife. But gradually, my world became smaller and smaller. I stopped meeting friends. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't have time. I stopped going shopping because there was always something else that needed to be done. I stopped visiting the salon. The hair appointments became every 3 months, then every 6, then not at all. I stopped reading, stopped painting, stopped taking walks, stopped doing anything that belonged to me. My entire life became centered around one question. What does Do-yoon need today? At first, he noticed. He'd thank me, compliment the meals, and bring me gifts. Tell me how much he appreciated me. Those moments kept me going, made me believe the sacrifices were worth it. Then the dinner party started. The first one wasn't a problem. Just a few business associates. Once a month. I could handle that. I spent days preparing, decorating, and planning. Everything went perfectly. The guests loved the food. Do-yoon was happy. I was exhausted but proud. Then once a month became twice. Twice became 3 times before I realized what was happening. There was some kind of event almost every week. Business dinners, investor gatherings, networking parties, corporate celebrations, fundraisers, and private meetings. The reasons changed. The workload didn't. I planned every menu, prepared every room, cooked every dish, served every guest, refilled every glass, and cleaned every plate. Then when the guests finally left, I cleaned the mansion by myself. After that, I still had to prepare Do-yoon's late-night meal because he was usually hungry after entertaining clients. There were nights I finished cleaning at 2 in the morning only to wake up again at 5. Sometimes I was so tired that I'd sit on the edge of the bed for just a minute. Then I woke up an hour later, still wearing my apron. There were nights I didn't even have the energy to change clothes. I slept exactly as I was, wearing an apron, messy hair, and aching feet, and somehow repeated the same routine the next day. The strange thing was that I couldn't pinpoint exactly when everything changed. There was no single moment, no dramatic argument, no shocking betrayal. Just small changes, tiny shifts, one after another like cracks forming in glass, too small to notice individually, until one day the entire thing shattered. I often found myself staring at old photographs, pictures from when we first met, the coffee shop, the Han River, our wedding, the honeymoon. The man in those photos looked at me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. The man who now lived in my house barely looked at me at all. And that confused me, because I couldn't understand what happened. Where did the thoughtful man who waited outside a coffee shop every morning go? Where did the man who remembered every little thing about me go? Where did the husband who used to call me 3 times a day just to hear my voice go? Sometimes, late at night, after finishing the dishes and turning off the lights, I'd stand alone in the kitchen and ask myself the same question. Was he changing? Or had this been who he was all along? I didn't know, but I was about to find out, because the next thing he took from me wasn't my job. It wasn't my free time. And it wasn't my independence. It was something far more painful. The first time I suspected something was wrong, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Do-yoon was spending more nights away from home, more business trips, more meetings, more excuses. Whenever I asked, he always had an answer, and because I loved him, I believed him, until the actress appeared. At first, it was just rumors online, a photograph here, an article there, nothing concrete, nothing that proved anything. Then one morning, while reading an article, I saw the actress wearing something that made my stomach drop. A necklace. Not just any necklace. The necklace. A month earlier, I had found the jewelry box in Do-yoon's home office. A beautiful diamond necklace. When I asked about it, he smiled and said it was for an important client. I believed him, just like I believed everything else. Now that same necklace hung around the actress's neck as she smiled for photographers. I stared at the article for a long time. Long enough for the screen to go dark, long enough for the truth to settle in. The necklace had never been for a client. And deep down, I knew the actress wasn't either. After that, the articles became impossible to ignore. Trips to Italy, Paris, and Tokyo. Business trips that somehow always seemed to include her. Pictures taken at restaurants, luxury hotels, and private events. Every time I saw another headline, a little more of me disappeared. But I never confronted him. Not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of fighting for attention. Tired of begging to matter. Tired of feeling like the third person in my own marriage. So I kept doing the house chores and hosting parties while pretending until my body finally gave up. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because I was preparing for another dinner party. One of Do-yoon's biggest clients was coming. There were 30 guests expected. I had been on my feet since dawn trying to get everything ready while ignoring the dizziness that had followed me for days. I thought it was exhaustion, nothing more. Then I collapsed. 1 minute I was carrying trays. The next minute, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital. The room smelled like antiseptic. The lights were painfully bright. A nurse was adjusting my IV. And there was an emptiness inside me that I couldn't explain. The doctor arrived an hour later. His expression was gentle, the kind of expression doctors wear when they have bad news. I remember every word. You were pregnant. Pregnant? The word echoed through my head. How? I hadn't known. I was so busy surviving every day that I hadn't noticed, hadn't even considered it. The doctor continued the stress, the exhaustion, physical strain, and lack of rest was the reason I had a miscarriage. I heard the words, but they felt distant and muted, as if they were happening to someone else. I spent 3 days in that hospital room. 3 days. And during those 3 days, my husband never came. Not once. No flowers, no visit, no phone call. Not even after the numerous calls and texts I sent. At first, I kept checking my phone. Then I stopped, because every time the screen remained blank, it hurt more. By the 3rd day, I already knew if he wanted to come, he would have come. When I was finally discharged, I took a taxi home alone. The mansion felt colder than usual, empty and quiet. I had barely stepped inside when Do-yoon walked through the front door. A suitcase rolled behind him. He looked surprised to see me. "You're home." Home, as if I'd been on vacation. As if I'd spent the last 3 days relaxing somewhere. I stared at him, waiting for him to explain, waiting for him to ask how I was feeling, waiting for him to notice how pale I looked. He loosened his tie. I just got back from Italy. Italy. The word nearly made me laugh. I had an important business trip. I said nothing because I had already seen the new articles, the photographs, the smiling actress beside him in Rome, the romantic dinners, the luxury shopping districts, the pictures that had spread across entertainment websites 2 days ago. Business trip, right? I looked at him, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no disappointment, and no sadness. Just emptiness. He kept talking about meetings, clients, investors, and deals. Never once asking how I was feeling, or what happened, or acknowledging that he got my text. Never once noticing something was wrong. Never once asking why my eyes looked swollen from crying. And I never told him. I never told him that while he was taking photographs in Italy, I lost our child. A child I hadn't even known existed. A child that left this world without either parent knowing or caring. At least, that's how it felt. The next week, there was another dinner party. Then another. Then another. The guests came. The laughter returned. The wine flowed. The plates piled up. And I went back to work because in that house, grief didn't stop the schedule. Heartbreak didn't cancel events. And neither did losing a baby. The parties never ended. Neither did loneliness. The dinner that finally broke me happened on a Saturday. 50 guests. It took 2 days of preparation, almost no sleep, and one special guest, his mistress or my co-wife. The same woman who had accompanied our husband, on countless business trips. The same woman whose face I had seen in articles, interviews, and photographs. The same woman who smiled at cameras while wearing gifts my husband claimed were for clients. When she arrived, Do-yoon personally greeted her at the entrance. Meanwhile, I was in the kitchen, trying to make sure 100 people were fed. I barely had time to think about it. There was too much work, too many guests, too many demands. The night blurred into a cycle of carrying trays, serving food, refilling drinks, and cleaning spills. I was in the kitchen when Do-yoon rushed in. He threw the pot of rice and complained that I was being lazy. Lazy? I was the only person cooking and serving his guests. When he left, I looked at the mess, wiped my eyes, and went to serve drinks. I was rushing through the living room with a tray of champagne glasses when I heard someone call my name, Fatima. I turned to see my co-wife walking towards me. She stood directly in my path with her perfect makeup, perfect dress, and perfect smile. I tightened my grip on the tray. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I tried stepping around her. She stepped into my path again. I've wanted to talk to you. I glanced toward the dining area where guests were waiting. I can't right now. Her smile never changed. It'll only take a second. I'm busy. I shifted the tray, trying to move past her. Then her hand struck the edge of the tray. Several glasses tipped over. Champagne splashed across her dress. The room fell silent. For a second, neither of us moved. Then suddenly, she gasped. Her eyes filled with tears, and she started crying. I'm sorry. I blinked, confused. What? I'm so sorry. Her voice trembled dramatically. Please don't be angry with me. The entire room turned to look. I stood there frozen, trying to understand what was happening. Why was she apologizing? Why was she crying? What game was this? Then I heard footsteps. Do-yoon. He pushed through the crowd, immediately concerned, covering his face. Not for me, for her. He grabbed her shoulders. Are you okay? She nodded through tears. The sight made my stomach twist because I couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at me with that much concern. Then his eyes landed on me and instantly hardened. What did you do? What? I stared at him, speechless. What? Apologize. The room seemed to spin. Do-yoon. Apologize. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You didn't even ask what happened. His jaw tightened. The actress lowered her head, still pretending to cry. The performance deserved an award. Do-yoon. She hit the tray. I said, apologize. His voice boomed through the room. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. I felt every eye in the mansion focused on me. My face burned with humiliation. Tears gathered in my eyes, not because of the actress, because of him, because my husband had already decided I was guilty before hearing a single word. I tried again. Please just let me explain. He cut me off. The next words hit harder than any slap. You're so useless. The room became completely silent. You can't do anything right. I felt my heart crack. Guest after guest looked away, embarrassed for me, ashamed for me. But nobody said anything. Do-yoon wasn't finished. A good-for-nothing woman. The tears finally spilled. I could barely see him. I could barely breathe or think. Then he shoved me. I lost my balance and fell. Right there, in front of everyone. The tray crashed beside me. The sound echoed through the mansion. Nobody moved or spoke. I sat on the floor, staring at the broken glass, the spilled drinks, the expensive shoes surrounding me. And suddenly, I couldn't get up. Not because I was hurt, because I was humiliated. My entire marriage flashed before my eyes. The resignation, the house chores, cheating, the miscarriage, the loneliness, every sacrifice, every excuse, every lie I told myself, and this was where it had led. To the floor. At my husband's feet, like I was nothing. When I finally found the strength to stand, I didn't look at anyone, not him, not the actress, not the guests. I simply turned and ran up the stairs, down the hallway, into my bedroom. I locked the door, then collapsed and cried. I cried until my chest hurt. I cried until my eyes swelled shut. I cried until there were no tears left. At some point, exhaustion won. I fell asleep, still wearing my apron. The next thing I knew, my phone was ringing. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. My head throbbed. My eyes burned. I grabbed the phone. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello? Mrs. Han? A man's voice. My name is Kim. I'm Mr. Han's attorney. My stomach dropped. Attorney? I sat upright immediately. Attorney? Yes. He paused. Mr. Han would like you downstairs. The call ended. For several seconds, I simply stared at the phone. My hands suddenly felt cold. Something was deeply wrong. I forced myself out of bed. I washed my face and changed clothes, then slowly made my way downstairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I entered the living room, both men were already waiting. Do-yoon sat calmly on the sofa, expressionless, as if the previous night had never happened. Beside him sat a lawyer. A thick folder rested on the coffee table. The moment I saw it, a strange feeling settled in my chest. Because after everything that had happened, I already knew this meeting wasn't going to save my marriage. It was going to end it. I signed the divorce papers without reading them twice. Not because I didn't care, because I was tired of fighting, tired of hoping, tired of mourning a marriage that had died long before the paperwork arrived. The lawyer explained that the divorce wouldn't be finalized immediately. A few months, maybe 2, maybe 3. He spoke about legal procedures, waiting periods, and formalities. I barely listened. My signature was already on the page. The rest no longer mattered. When the meeting ended, I walked upstairs without saying a word. Do-yoon didn't stop me. I locked myself in the bathroom. Then I looked at my reflection and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. I was only 26, but I looked older. The sparkle in my eyes was gone. My skin looked dull. Dark circles sat beneath my eyes. My shoulders seemed permanently weighed down. Even my smile had disappeared. I couldn't remember the last time I genuinely smiled. The realization hurt because somewhere between being a wife and being a servant, I had lost myself. I wiped away my tears. I walked into the bedroom, opened my laptop, and updated my resume. Every job, every achievement, every qualification, everything I'd spent years building before I met Han Do-yoon. Then I started applying for jobs. One application, then another, then another. For the first time in years, I felt something strange, hope. The next morning, I booked a salon appointment. My first one in forever. The stylist barely hid her shock when she saw the condition of my hair. I laughed. For the first time in months, I actually laughed. Hours later, I walked out feeling lighter, like I could finally breathe again. Then I went shopping. Not for groceries, not for dinner parties, not for guests. For me, I just want to get a few beautiful outfits, a pair of good heels, and one handbag I'd been eyeing for years. Just little, simple things, but they felt revolutionary. Because every purchase answered a question I hadn't realized I was asking. What does Fatima I want? Not Do-yoon. Over the following days, my life slowly began changing. I stopped doing the chores and spent more time talking to people, living life and doing the things Do-yoon stole from me. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, started taking calls again, long calls. The kind that ended with uncontrollable laughter. Sometimes I'd be laughing so hard that tears rolled down my cheeks. The mansion felt different, not because it had changed, because I had. I stopped preparing elaborate meals. If I wanted pasta, I made pasta. If I wanted soup, I made soup. If I wanted cereal for dinner, I ate cereal. For years, I'd cooked like a restaurant chef. Now, I cook like a normal person. And it felt wonderful. Then, one afternoon, I received an email. I stared at the screen for almost a minute, then read it again and again. I got a job, a senior management position with a better salary, better benefits, and a better future. I screamed so loudly that I scared myself. That night, I celebrated with friends, and for the first time in years, I felt excited about tomorrow. The changes didn't stop there. Flowers started arriving, then gift baskets, then chocolates, then luxury perfumes. I knew exactly who they were from, but I never acknowledged them. I always smiled when I got those gifts, which seemed to bother one particular person, Han Do-yoon. At first, he pretended not to notice. Then, he started noticing everything: the flowers, the calls, the late nights, the laughter, the fact that I smiled again, the fact that I no longer looked at him, and most importantly, the fact that I no longer needed him. One evening, I was getting ready to meet friends. A fitted gold dress, elegant but simple. The kind of dress I used to avoid wearing because I never had anywhere to go. I finished my makeup, grabbed my purse, and headed downstairs. Do-yoon was in the living room working on his laptop, or at least pretending to. The moment he looked up, he froze. His eyes followed me slowly as I walked past like he was seeing me for the first time. I almost smiled, because the expression on his face was priceless. Fatima. I stopped. What? His gaze moved over my outfit again. A crease formed between his brows. You're going out wearing that? I blinked. Then I looked down at myself. Wearing what? That dress. I almost laughed. The audacity. After everything. This was what he wanted to discuss. It's inappropriate. I turned toward him fully. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled, the kind that irritated him immediately. My darling Do-yoon. My voice was calm. We're getting divorced. Remember? His jaw tightened. You still shouldn't dress like that. I laughed. The sound seemed to make him even angrier. And you still shouldn't have cheated on me. His expression darkened. Mine didn't, because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. For the first time, his approval meant absolutely nothing. You don't get to tell me what to wear anymore. I adjusted my purse. And you definitely don't get to tell me where I can go. Then I turned to leave. Fatima. I paused. Not because I wanted to, because his voice sounded different, almost strained. Who keeps sending those gifts? There it was. The real question. It was no longer about the dress, not the late nights, not the friends, not the gifts. I smiled to myself because suddenly I understood. Han Do-yoon wasn't angry. He was curious, and curiosity was quickly becoming jealousy. I looked over my shoulder and met his eyes, and gave him the exact same thing he'd given me for years. Nothing. No explanation. No answer. No reassurance. Then I walked out the door, leaving him alone with the one thing he could never control. His imagination. 4 days. That was all that remained before the divorce became official. 4 days. Until I would finally be free. Ironically, those were the longest 4 days of Han Do-yoon's life, and the happiest 4 days I'd had in years. The business trip was amazing. Not because of the destination, because of the people. For the first time in a long time, in 3 years, I was surrounded by people who respected me, people who listened when I spoke, people who valued my opinions, people who didn't see me as a servant. When my flight landed, one of my coworkers offered to drive me home. His name was Lee Suk. He was kind, funny, and patient. The type of person who could make an entire group laugh without trying. By the time we reached the mansion, it was already evening. I unfastened my seatbelt. "Thank you for the ride." "Anytime." I started reaching for the door. Then he stopped me. "Wait." He handed me a small package. I frowned. "What's this?" "Open it later." I laughed. "Lee Suk, it's not expensive." His grin widened. "I know you're about to ask." I shook my head, hopelessly amused. Then he surprised me again. He pulled me into a brief hug. A normal hug. The kind friends gave each other every day. Nothing more, nothing less. Before pulling away, he leaned closer. "Don't let anyone convince you that you're hard to love." The words caught me off guard. My chest tightened. Then I smiled, the kind that reached my eyes. I thanked him and headed toward the house, completely unaware that someone had been watching everything. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Do-yoon was standing in the foyer. His expression is unreadable. The smile immediately faded from my face. "What?" His eyes narrowed. "Who was that?" I sighed, already exhausted. "A coworker." "A coworker?" The way he repeated it made me want to laugh. "Yes." He folded his arms. "I saw him hugging you." I blinked. "Okay, that was unexpected." "And?" His jaw tightened. "And I saw him whispering in your ear." I stared at him for several seconds, trying to process the absurdity of this conversation. Then he said something that nearly made me choke. "You're following men around now?" For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. Then I realized he wasn't. And suddenly, it became hilarious. I smiled, the kind that instantly irritated him. Do-yoon. I checked the date on my phone. Then I looked back at him. 4 days. What? 4 days. I held up 4 fingers. In 4 days we'll be divorced. His face darkened. I continued smiling. "So what exactly are you upset about?" The silence that followed was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I hummed softly and walked around him. I even spun once on my way toward the staircase. I felt lighter than air. For years I'd cried because of that man. Tonight, I couldn't stop smiling. Behind me, Do-yoon remained frozen and speechless. And that, more than anything, felt like victory. The next evening, my company hosted a formal dinner. One of our biggest clients had flown in from overseas. Attendance was mandatory. So I went. And yes, Lee Suk attended too. The venue was elegant. Crystal chandeliers, live music, expensive suits and designer gowns. Everything corporate events loved showing off. I was laughing at one of Suk's terrible jokes when I noticed someone staring. Han Do-yoon. Across the room, his gaze fixed directly on us. I almost rolled my eyes. Lee Suk leaned closer. "Your ex-husband keeps looking over here." "Future ex-husband." Lee Suk chuckled. "My mistake." The correction made me smile. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to improve Do-yoon's mood. Throughout the evening, Lee Suk remained exactly as he always was, attentive, respectful, and protective. Whenever someone interrupted me, he redirected the conversation back. Whenever I needed something, he noticed before I asked. When I laughed, he laughed. When I spoke, he listened. The contrast was impossible to ignore, especially for Do-yoon. More than once, I caught him staring at me, like he was trying to understand something, like he couldn't figure out why I looked happier now than I ever had in our marriage. Even his mistress noticed. She followed his gaze, again and again, each time finding him watching me instead of her. The smile on her face gradually disappeared. Good. For years, I had watched them together. She could survive one evening of discomfort. Near the end of the event, Lee Suk bent down and whispered something in my ear. I burst out laughing, loud enough that several people turned to look. When I glanced across the room afterward, Do-yoon was already gone. Later that night, I returned home. The mansion was quiet, dark, and empty. I didn't see him. I didn't look for him either. What I didn't know was that he was sitting alone in his study, a glass, untouched, beside him. His thoughts are louder than the silence. For the first time in years, there was no anger, no irritation, no excuses, just questions. Questions he should have asked long ago. When had Fatima stopped smiling around him? When was the last time she'd laughed that way in his presence? When was the last time he had listened to her? Really listened? When was the last time he had made her feel loved? The answers never came. Because deep down, he already knew them. They were buried beneath years of neglect, years of selfishness, years of taking her for granted. And perhaps the most painful realization of all finally arrived. Fatima wasn't leaving him. She had already left. The divorce papers were simply catching up to reality. And for the first time since he asked for the divorce, Han Do-yoon regretted signing them. That night, long after I went to bed, there was a knock on my door. I ignored it. Another knock followed, then another. Fatima, Do-yoon's voice. I closed my eyes. I wasn't ready. Fatima, please. Please? I couldn't remember the last time he'd said that word to me. Slowly, I got out of bed and opened the door. The moment I did, he stepped inside. His eyes were red as if he hadn't slept. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then, he did something I never expected. He bowed, the kind reserved for genuine remorse. I'm sorry. I froze. I'm sorry for everything. His voice broke. And suddenly, all the confidence, pride, and arrogance that had defined him for years seemed to disappear. I was wrong. I looked away because hearing those words hurt more than not hearing them. Where had they been when I needed them? When I was cleaning 15 rooms? When I cried myself to sleep? When I lost our child? I ruined everything. The room fell silent. Then he whispered something that made my chest tighten. I ruined you. My eyes immediately filled with tears. For years I had wanted him to understand. And now that he finally did, it hurts. It hurt so much. I don't know what happened to me. His voice shook. I became someone I don't even recognize. I laughed bitterly. Someone? My tears spilled. You became my nightmare, Do-yoon. The words landed like a punch. He closed his eyes. I continued before I lost the courage. You cheated on me. You humiliated me. You treated me like a servant. His shoulders sagged. You made me quit my job. You isolated me. My voice cracked. You watched me destroy myself. He lowered his head. And then I said the one thing I had never told him. The day you were in Italy. His head lifted. I couldn't stop crying now. The day you were taking pictures with her. My breathing became uneven. I was in a hospital. Confusion appeared on his face. Then concern. Then fear. Fatima. I shook my head. No. My voice shattered. You don't get to interrupt. The room became painfully quiet. I wiped my tears and forced the words out. I was pregnant. The color drained from his face completely. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I didn't even know. A sob escaped me. I didn't know until the doctor told me. His knees almost gave out. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, staring at me, frozen, shocked, and broken. The stress. I laughed through tears. The exhaustion. My voice trembled. The work. I looked directly at him, my hands on my stomach. Our baby died. The poor child died because the father was irresponsible. The silence afterward felt endless. Then I watched something inside him break. His face crumpled. His hands covered his mouth. And for the first time since I'd met him, Han Do-yoon cried. He cried like a man who had just realized the full weight of what he'd done. I'm sorry. His voice was barely audible. I'm so sorry. Again and again and again. As if repetition could somehow undo the past. It couldn't. Nothing could. Eventually he moved closer, slowly, as if afraid I'd disappear. Please, his voice shook. Please give me another chance. I said nothing. I'll do anything. I could barely see his face. You can keep your job, he paused. You can do whatever you want. We can go back to how things were. I closed my eyes. Because that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want the past. I wanted the future. I lost. I'll never cheat again. His voice cracked. I swear. Still, I remained silent. Not because I wanted to punish him, because I didn't know if my heart could survive believing him again. I wept bitterly when I thought about how I'd have been doing so well as an expected mother. But no, my husband became the monster that swallowed my unborn baby. I could still feel the pains after I left the hospital. When I saw other women holding babies, I felt sad. I wiped my tears and told him to leave the room. He looked at me. He didn't move until I screamed. I ran to the bed and cried until I fell asleep. The following days felt surreal. Almost unreal. The domestic staff returned. Every single one. The cleaners, the chef, the gardeners, the assistants. The mansion suddenly came alive again. Breakfast appeared every morning, prepared by Do-yoon himself. The first time he brought a tray into my room, I almost laughed from shock. This was the same man who once woke me up to cook for him. Now he stood awkwardly beside my bed, holding coffee and pancakes, trying not to spill anything. Flowers appeared, then jewelry, then handwritten notes. The gifts kept coming. But this time, they weren't apologies. They were effort. When I worked late, he waited for me. When I came home tired, he ran baths. When I forgot to eat, he reminded me. When I spoke, he listened. For the first time in 3 years. Then one day, he asked a question. Fatima, go on a trip with me. I looked up. What? A trip, his voice softened. Just us. I almost said no. But something in his eyes stopped me. Not confidence. Not entitlement. Hope. Fear. Love. We went. Just the two of us. No business meetings. No guests. No phones. No assistants. No distractions. Just us. For the first time in years, we talked about everything. The pain, the mistakes, the resentment, the loneliness, the child we lost, the marriage we almost buried. There were nights I cried. There were nights he cried. There were nights we simply sat together, saying nothing at all. And somehow, that was enough. One evening, watching the sunset together, he took my hand. I'm sorry. The words were familiar now. But this time, they felt different. Not because they erased the past, because they came with change. I looked at him, the man who had once broken my heart, the man who had spent months trying to put the pieces back together. And finally, I forgave him. Not in one dramatic moment, not because the pain disappeared, but because healing had slowly taken its place. The divorce papers were withdrawn. The lawyers were dismissed. And for the first time in a very long time, we started over. Not as the people we used to be, but as better versions of ourselves. Years later, when people asked about our marriage, they always assumed our story was perfect. It wasn't. Our story was messy, painful, and complicated. But maybe that's why it survived. Because love isn't proven when everything is easy. It's proven when two broken people decide to rebuild what they almost destroyed together. And this time, we got it right. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in my shoes, after the cheating, after the humiliation, after losing the baby, after everything Do-yoon put me through, would you have given him a second chance? Or would you have walked away forever? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. And while you're there, let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how many different countries and cities are part of this family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next emotional journey. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Until next time, remember, sometimes people can change, but forgiveness is always a choice. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next story.